no other story bigger last year and what will be bigger this year than fracking. Depending on who you believe, it's the worst thing in the world, or it's going to change the face of Lancashire. It's a huge story. Anti-fracking protesters are claiming that activity at the fracking site on the Far Coast has been scaled down, prompting questions over its future. Before the Christmas break, the energy company Quadrilla suggested that equipment would be removed from the Preston New Road sites to save on costs, but would be returned in the new year. But some campaigners are claiming victory, describing activity at the site as something like a closing down sale. Well, our reporter Mike Stevens has been to Preston New Road to speak to some of the protesters.
It's been gone from being a fully functioning Frack site to what more or less looks like the Marie Celeste. It's very quiet. A lot of the fracking equipment has left, and Quadrilla haven't told the community or anyone, including their own shareholders, what their real plans are for the future, which leaves us as a community in limbo. They need to start answering our questions and allaying our fears as to what potentially may have happened or not happened on site and what their long-term plans are.
Quadrilla have always said that community engagement is one of their top priorities. Do you think that's the case?
Totally not. I mean, they go on about transparency, but they're not answering any questions, and local residents are really concerned about what happens next. And, we have a right to know what happens next. People have legitimate concerns as to what's going on.
And Tina, Quadrilla have been fracking here for a few months now. They've said that ultimately this would bring economic prosperity to Lancashire and to the Fylde Coast. Can you see any of that?
No, not at all. I mean, we see police overtime. We see huge cost to our taxpayers in covering those police costs. We see nothing but detriment to the community and no real gains, because even if it did work, even if by some miracle they managed to pull this off, then who's going to get that profit? Where's that money going to go? We know already from their own reports there are 11 jobs per site. 11! What? Where is the gain for Lancashire in that,
Well, Quadrilla has told BBC Radio Lancashire this morning that they are currently testing the flow of gas, and they will release the results of this when they have them. Well, back in October last year, the government appointed the UK's first commissioner for shale gas. The person who took up that role is Natascha Engel, and I'm pleased to say she joins us all this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what does your job entail?
Well, it's kind of changed a little bit since the first appointment in October, where originally it was supposed to be just sort of to liaise between local residents, the government, the industry, the regulators. I think there's been a lot of activity between government, industry and campaigners. And until October, I think that actually it was residents, not those people who are necessarily campaigning and locking onto the gates, but those residents who just want to know a little bit more about it, who don't want to turn up to public meetings because they don't like all the shouting that goes on there, but they do just want to know a little bit more about the process of fracking and how it happens and is it safe, and just have those general conversations, which at the moment, I mean, in your piece, what you covered there very well was how, you've got very opposing views, and it feels like there's either, on one extreme or on the other extreme, but actually the vast majority of people are somewhere in the middle and just kind of, they just want reassurance about that, the fact that fracking is just a process of getting gas out of the ground. It's not uniquely different from any other process of getting oil and gas out of the ground.
So would you say that your role is a impartial listener?
It's definitely it's definitely independent. So I'm independent from government, I'm independent from regulators, and I'm definitely independent from industry. But I'm not impartial. But I do support the safe extraction of gas from under our feet in order to, first of all, for meeting our energy security, but most of all, and this is something that we don't talk enough about, is about how do we get to meet our very ambitious carbon reduction targets in energy. This is what the Green campaigners are constantly talking about fossil fuels and decarbonising the energy that we use at the moment. Well, frack gas is an essential part of doing that, and I wish we were talking a bit more about that rather than whether it contaminates water and causing earthquakes and whether it's safe or not, because I think that's actually where that's what the conversation really is, that people really want to be having.
So it sounds like that you're very pro-fracking, and you've also worked for INEOS as well, which has licences to carry out drilling at a number of venues. Given this, although you've touched on it now, you're pro-fracking, aren't you? You're not impartial.
As long as it's done safely, absolutely, yes. And I think it's absolutely essential for our energy security, absolutely.
OK, so if you're not impartial, then how can you ensure that people have impartial information?
I think it's about pointing people in the right direction. At the moment, the only information that's really getting out there is anti-fracking, is about the negative side of fracking. The positive side of it, I don't think is really getting very much airtime. But I think also, your question is really about my impartiality.
Yeah.
I think that actually,
and you're
being
not
the commissioner. Well, the role of the commissioner for shale gas, it'd be very odd if I was against shale gas. If you look at the children's commissioner, she supports children in society. If you look at the
There's a bit of a
residence
difference,
commissioner for
isn't there?
HS2. Well, I don't think so. I think actually it's really important that we recognise why getting gas out of the ground in the UK rather than importing it and being reliant on imports really matters. It matters to our energy security, but it also really matters to reducing the carbon in the energy that we use. And I don't see why that's really a problem. I think that's actually something that's to be supported.
But there's a problem because there's a lot of people in Lancashire who feel that the entire process of fracking is unsafe. How can you reassure them?
There are some people who will never be reassured, and part of your package was also somebody saying that there are people who, no matter what you say to them, will always be against fracking, and it's actually those people who at the moment aren't involved in any campaign for or against, who just want to know a little bit more about it. And it is about saying to them, look, it's not materially any different from getting oil and gas out of the ground in any conventional way. It's just a different process. It isn't intrinsically unsafe in the way that it isn't intrinsically unsafe getting coal out of the ground or any other hydrocarbons. It's just that this has been used as a campaign by people who really dislike fracking and don't want it to happen. And that's fair enough. I mean, that's their democratic right to protest against it. But I think that there's a very large majority of people out there who want to know more about it and want to know what the benefits are of having a domestic gas industry.
You talked about their democratic rights. The county council voted that they didn't want fracking. And a lot of people are very angry. A lot of people who would never usually protest, they're on that Preston New Road site. And they're very angry that even though they said no and their local politicians said no, the government went, we don't care what you voted for. We're going to plonk this on your local doorstep. You can understand why they're angry.
Absolutely, I can understand that. And I mean, it's the same with any controversial planning application. I mean, when I was an MP in North East Derbyshire, we had loads of applications for large-scale housing projects that people didn't want. The council voted against them and it got overturned and national government imposed it. And I think that that's one of the things that actually my role, hopefully in the future, can kind of develop that sort of better relationship between the sort of smoothing the planning process a bit better, because at the moment it is just really, for or against, yes, no, and then having things imposed on you. I don't think that's to the benefit of anybody, to be honest. And I think actually...
I was going to say, your role is supposed to be a kind of link, isn't it, between communities and the industry. So what dealings have you had with Lancashire residents so far?
I've been to see as many groups as I possibly can. It's Lancashire, but there's also applications in North Yorkshire and around the sort of South Sheffield area. So I've been sort of travelling around meeting groups anywhere that I can. But I've met actually mainly the groups who are opposed to fracking in Lancashire. I've met some people who are entirely neutral about it and just want to know more about it. But I think that is the key part of it is about listening to people and feeding back to government, feeding back to the regulators, and crucially also feeding back to industry about what people are saying. I mean, I think government, regulators and the industry are perfectly aware of those people who oppose it. But I think it's also important, and that they're very, very vocal, the groups that oppose fracking. But in terms of numbers, they aren't the majority. And I think it's really important.
How do you know that? How do you
Because
know
the number
that?
of people that I've spoken to, the groups that I'm speaking to, who are organised against fracking, I mean, they are highly organised and they're very, very good at getting their voices heard on shows like yours. What we hear far, far less of is those people who are neutral about it or who are supportive. And I think, that they've been sort of silenced a little bit, and I think it's important that their voices are heard too.
They've not been silenced.
Well, they find it very difficult to speak on this issue, especially if they feel that they don't know enough about it.
Not on this show. People
I don't know.
Go on.
Have you? I don't know whether you've been to public meetings on fracking. I'm sure your reporters have, but it's really interesting that certainly over the last sort of couple of years, I used to do public meetings on controversial issues all the time, and it was always a really good opportunity to sort of debate, pros and cons, and people would sort of air their views. But there was never what we have with fracking, which is that there's only one side that really gets to shout and silence the debate, and to be honest, public meetings have become impossible on fracking because unless you absolutely oppose it, you're not allowed to speak, and I think that's something that's a real shame. So actually what I've been doing is sort of getting through the meeting the civic groups, the smaller community groups that aren't to do with fracking but that live close by and just want to know what all the fuss is about, because unless you're either really, really opposed or you're really, really against, you probably just don't want to have anything to do with it.
Since fracking began here in Lancashire, there have been a number of red and amber alerts on the traffic light system, which records the level of earth tremors. Now, Quadrilla have said that they'd like to see these limits relaxed. What are your thoughts on this?
I think we need to get the science involved in this. I mean, whether they're relaxed or they're not relaxed should be a decision that's done by the regulators, not by politicians. And I think it's really important that we let Quadrilla do their flow test and see what's down there. I mean, I think that's one of the other things that's just come out of your piece that was very interesting, was about, it's like the Marie Celeste on the Preston New Road site. Well, that's probably normally what a fracking site is like. It's only those times when they are drilling where there's really only very much activity. But I think everybody, whether you support it or you oppose it, I think now is the time really to sort of actually let Quadrilla get on and see what's down there, to see whether there is a viable industry. Because the sooner that they get on and do that, the sooner we know whether what sort of extent of industry there could be, that we can make an accurate assessment of what's down there, what can be got out, what kind of volumes of gas, if any. And I think actually that's really, now is absolutely the time to do that.
Have you been to the Preston New Road site?
I have. I went before when they first built it, and then I went just after they finished drilling. So I've been twice.
So you haven't been while they've been fracking?
No, I've been outside it while they've been fracking. So I've seen the big tower and the gooseneck while they were fracking. Yes.
Okay. Natascha Engel, thank you for joining us this morning. That is the Commissioner for Shale Gas in the UK, Natascha Engel.